Hi Fasters! How you going out there? It's the Puppeteer here again. I'm going to give this another go after last night's debacle. Apologies for those that tuned in. Sorry for the audio quality. I had a setting checked on my screen capture software that I shouldn't have, and that caused a nasty feedback loop. So apologies for that. If you see any problems, can you just let us know in the comments? I've got them sitting up there so I can see them. Okay, I want to just go over what we're doing here again for the benefit of you all. I'm looking at doing a live tutorial series, live streaming video and trying to make them interactive. And I can't commit to a schedule, but I want to try and do these when I can. It's a better way for me to try and get knowledge across in a much more efficient manner. There was a few comments last time from episode 1 from the display and that. I've tried to make a few adjustments. I've got a new camera coming which should be here next week, and hopefully the next one will have a better view of the screen, but hopefully you'll be able to see it. Hopefully you'll be able to see it okay today. Again, if you can't, just let us know in the comments and I'll try and explain a little bit better what we're doing. I don't think there's any more sort of administrative stuff to get out of the way. So what we're going to do is get stuck into the tutorial. So this tutorial, I want to explain the effects architecture of the PC3, and if we've got some time I'm going to have a look at the K2600 and KSP8 as well. And the objective of this really is to give you guys a better understanding about what happens within the signal chain of the PC3, so that you can use it to program things how you want them, to make this sort of sound and to try and get as much mileage out of your machine as you can. You have to excuse the dogs in the backyard. This time they're not my dogs, it's the neighbour's dogs. They're particularly nasty. Well, they're not nasty dogs, they're just noisy dogs. So I think these videos are going to be interspersed with barking. I think that's the way of things. The universe has told me that I've just got to accept it, so I will. Hi doggy. Okay, so let us get stuck into it. Again, I've done a few little cheat sheets. I have put them up in the mahogany room, so you can have a look at them there. I've also put the ones up from the last tutorial as well. Alright, let's get stuck into it. Here's my PC3, but let's have a look. Let's actually instead go and have a look at the cheat sheet, and we'll start taking you through what we've got in the tutorial here. Okay, hopefully you can see my cursor up there. It's a little white one there. Right, what we've got here is a bit of a diagrammatic representation of the signal routing and the effects architecture within the PC3. So if you think of a program, and on the left here we've got layers of the program, and in this example we've got 4 layers. So in reality you can have up to 32 layers, but in this case here I've just shown 4 layers because it's all we really need to show what the effects architecture is. Out of each layer, your last block's an amp block, and that sends, generally the amp block will send your signal off to do something with it. And in this case what we're doing is we're going into the effects section. Now on the PC3, if you've gone to the effects page and been a little bit confused, well, mainly because there's a number of effects pages there, what we're going to have, what you've got there, and the default routing of every program is actually to go through the prog effects block. So by default, when you go to program 999 and you start programming, all of the layers are going to go through the prog effects. And within that you can select all the preset chains that are there on the PC3, and you can go in, you can edit them, and you can rearrange things. You can add bits and pieces to them, so you can sort of make these as complex as you need to. I'm just going to take a break. Just give me a second. Sorry, I just had to yell at the dog, so I just sort of didn't want that coming over this over the recording here. Right, what we've got is this prog effects here up the top, and that's your default one. And then what you can do for each independent layer, you've got an option to actually change that, and you can reroute that to a specific effect just for that layer. So what we can do is, and I'll show you where this is actually on the PC3. So let's just jump in and have a quick look. So if we go into the program, we scroll across till we come to the prog effects and layer effects. Prog effects, this is the first one. This is where you can select that the block here in orange. So that's your insert effect on prog effects. But if you go across to layer effects, you can see at the top here, up the top, you've got use program effects, and that's the default. Okay. Now, if we change layer effects mode to layer specific effects, what we've done is for that layer, we've turned off prog effects and we've enabled this layer effects. So it's just for that single layer. And you can see in this screen that you've got the option of setting an insert. So we can set little booth, for example, or whatever effect you've got, and it's a full range of effects. There's no limitation on what effect you can stick in there. It's the same range of effects as you can stick in the prog effects. You've got the option of setting output, so you can actually redirect a single layer to the alternative outputs if you wanted to, or you can leave it in the main outputs. And what you can also do is you can set the auxiliary sends for that layer. Now, what I want to explain here is the effects resources that are available within the PC3. You've got 32 PAUs, which are effects units that you can process with. So you've got up to 32 effects units. Now, it's not necessarily the block, because an effects DSP block can actually use more than one unit. But so if we just got to layer 2, okay, this right. So what you can, so you've got, what I was saying is you've got 16 layers or 16 effects buses and you've got 32 effects units that you can use. So those effects units can be distributed. They're distributed between your prog effects, your layer effects, and your auxiliary effects. The 16 buses are essentially these layer effects or prog effects. So each of those is equivalent to one effects bus. You can have up to a total of 16 of those at any one time. So in the default mode, you've got one of them per channel, one of them per MIDI channel. But as you start bringing these layer effects in, you start stealing from the other MIDI channels. Okay, so just bear that in mind. Anyway, so that's for these layer effects, and we'll just go through this layer effects page a little bit more. So you've got your auxiliary one send. We're going to talk about auxiliary effects in a second, but just remember that the layer effects and the prog effects have got are different. So you can set this one to soundboard, for example, and this one here. The effects send. So if you go to prog effects, if we set this send to 77. What we can do is we can set this to a different number on that layer, for example. So if we go down to layer 1, for example, we look at the prog effects. So let's just enable prog effects for layer 1. So you can see that we've got auxiliary 1 send at 77 decibels, and if we go up to layer 2, you can see that auxiliary send 1 is 90 decibels. So that the auxiliary sends can be set. They're actually tied to these effects buses, or in this case a layer effects, or to the prog effects. Okay, and what you've also got is you've got these auxiliary mods, and what this allows you to do is, if let's say we set the auxiliary send to, I don't know, 0 dB, so it can send a full range signal out. what you can do is if you go down to auxiliary 1, you can set that to, say, your mod wheel. And what you can then do is when you enable the mod wheel and push it up, it'll actually change the send in real time between 0 and whatever number you've got set here in auxiliary 1 send. You've got pre and post. I'm going to talk about pre and post in a second, but just bear in mind that you can set them here. And the final thing you've got is decibel or percent. So that's whether you work as a percent, which is 0 to 100% of your send, or whether you work in decibels. I keep mine on dB because that's what I'm used to working in, but that's completely up to you. It really is no difference for how the PC3 works in terms of the sends. Okay, let's get back to explaining a little bit more about this effects setup here. The option that you've got with a layer. So if we got to layer 3, for example, what we can do is that you might have an example. I'm just going to use an example here to explain this. You might have an example where you've got a piano sound on layer 1, for example. And layer 2 and 3, you might have, say, a sawtooth lead on those ones. Now, the piano sound, you might want to have that going through a nice chorus, and the sawtooth, you might have that going through a flanger and a delay for the lead. Maybe you've done a split, maybe you've done a layer. It doesn't really matter. But what I'm trying to say here is that for the two sawtooth layers, what you probably want to do is put them through the same effect. So one way you could do that is to program separate layer effects for those two layers. But another way that you can do it is that you can borrow the effects from another layer. And that's what we're going to do here. So if we go use another layer's effects and we set that to 2, what we're doing is that we are redirecting the output from layer 3 into the input of the layer effects. So let's have a look at that on the large page here. So that's what we've got here. We've got this. This is a red arrow. So what we're doing is directing layer 3 up into layer 2's effects in this case. And so let's say these two are sawtooths. This one's a piano. So the piano is going through the prog effects and doing what it does. Layers 2 and 3 are going through the layer effects that are dedicated for the sawtooth. Okay, so this is good because what it does is it reduces the amount of effects processing power required. So you might have quite a complex chain in here. If you had to duplicate it down for that layer there, you would use up twice as much effects power, and that means that you're going to have less available for other channels and for other layers and things. So that's why this is really, really useful, is to be able to borrow these layers. The other thing to bear in mind is that this goes in before these pre and post, before this pre-tap comes off. So I'm going to talk about your pre and post in a little bit, but just remember that this here actually comes in before this pre. So if it gets mixed into this effects bus, so this here is an effects bus, if it gets mixed into that effects bus, the pre and post for that effects bus affects this bus, not this layer. Okay? Even if it's one layer, if you've only got this layer effects just for this layer, of course it's for the layer. But if you've got multiple layers coming in to use your layer effects from a particular layer, just remember it comes in before before the tap comes off. Okay, so hopefully I haven't confused you too much there, but that really is it for the insert effects. So again, insert effects, you can use your full range. So let's have a look when we come out of your prog effects or your layer effects. Now, in addition to these insert effects, the PC3 also has 2 auxiliary effects buses. Sorry guys, just moving things around. Now these, I've put these in the global box because these are global to the machine. So if you're setting the auxiliary effects in song mode, they affect all of your programs that use auxiliary buses, they affect all of your setups that use auxiliary buses, etc. Similarly, if you set it in the program or the effects mode, it uses that globally throughout the entire PC3. Okay, so let's have a look and see how this works. with the auxiliary effects, you've got the option. This gives you a lot of routing options because it means that you can operate in parallel or you can operate in series or some sort of combination of both. So again, the default behavior is for the signal to come out of your layer into your prog effects and then out through this pre-post, go into the post. So it comes out of this into post, which is after the effects, after the insert effects, and then through your send into your auxiliary effects buses. So what you've got is you've got two separate sends for these posts, for the post, and two separate sends on the pre. This is a switch, so you can pick one or the other for either of these. Now you can set auxiliary 1 to go pre and auxiliary 2 to go post if you want. They don't have to be the same. You've got this power. Okay, now this is set on the effects bus. So the effects bus includes these sends. So I really should put a box around here and say this is the effects bus. So you've got, it comes from the program effects out of the post through the auxiliary send, which is where you can say how much of that signal or how loud that signal is that goes into the auxiliary effects. So these dials effectively work as a mixer, so you can put different amounts from these different things into the auxiliary effects. Okay, you've also got the signal that comes directly from your prog effects into the mixer here, and it goes out to your main outputs. Okay, so that's always active there. Right, so what you can do with the pre-effects, and like this line here is in the wrong spot, it actually comes out after all the signals are mixed. You can take a tap from before these prog effects and run them around the prog effects and into the auxiliary effects. Okay, so that lets you run them. That's how you run parallel effects. So if you want a delay line and you want a reverb line that's not affected by the delay, and you want a chorus that's separate again, you can do that by having prog effects going straight through to the mixer, and then your auxiliary effects, auxiliary effects 1 and auxiliary effects 2, both run from the pre position, and then these here then are parallel effects. Each of these layer effects buses, so for each one of these layer effects that you use, you've got exactly the same setup. I've only drawn one of them here, but you've actually got two auxiliary sends from each of the 16 effects buses. And again, they are pre and post the same way. So if you want to use these effects and then use these effects on top of it, you put them in post. If you want just the auxiliary effects to do a dry signal, you set it in pre. And again, these can be separate to these, so you can have this one set as pre and this one set as post for auxiliary 1. Okay, so I hope that's explained how these sends work. And the auxiliary effects themselves, as I said, they're global. The way that you can select these, I'll have a look at this a little bit more in a little bit. You can set those, if you're in program mode, it is whatever is selected on your program. But you can override those with in setup mode, song mode, and effects mode. You've got a range of overrides where you can actually say, oh no, I don't want to use that, I'll use something else instead. So here, again, your mixer, and then your final one, which we'll talk about here, is your master effects, and this is the effects that go on the output signal on its way to the main outputs. You've got a multi-band EQ, and there's 5 bands there total. You've got a low shelf, a high shelf, and 3 parametric bands, and then you've got a multi-band compressor. And you can change the order of these, and these here are set on a per setup basis. So each setup can have its own set of master effects, or you can choose to use whatever you've got programmed in your effects mode. There's a choice that you can make on the setup page, and I'll show you that before we finish. Okay, so let's go back to the PC3, and I'm going to go and have a look at a few of these things. So let's jump out of program mode. Let's jump into setup mode in a sec. I just want to turn these back to defaults. Okay. Let's get my pretty face back on the screen, because I am a very handsome man, as you can tell. I'm joking. Right, let's have a look. So if we go into setup mode, we just go to setup number 1, techno riff, switch 1 to 8, and if we go into here and we scroll across, we see that we come to a page all of effects. So if we press the effects page, what we've got is something that looks very similar to the effects mode. If you remember back to last week, I'll take you into the effects mode again. Actually, let's do the effects mode now, because this explains everything, and then we'll jump into setup mode. It's probably a better way to do it. So in the effects page, we talked about this last week, but what you've got is you've got each of your channels, which are illustrated up on these top line here. I hope that you can see that. Below that, you've got the insert effect for the particular channel, and then down below is you've got the auxiliaries that are set for that particular channel. Okay, we're on channel 2, so that's got the priority in terms of assigning effects, and it's got a huge amount of effects in there. There's 30 units being used by that effect, or by that channel. Okay, so what we've got is what you can do in this mode is that you can turn channels off. So here we've just turned off channel number 2, and you can see that all these Y's have suddenly come out of brackets, and if you've got a Y there, it means the effect is that the channel has effects, that they're enabled, and that they are being used. If it's a Y with a bracket around it, it means that there's effects on the channel, but you've run out of allocations to be able to enable those effects. So the PC3 doesn't have enough effects power to drive that one. So what it's done is it's temporarily disabled them until the effects become available. If you've got an N, it means that you have disabled the effects manually. Okay, so let's turn them back on channel 2, turn them off on a whole bunch of other things. You can see that just by doing that, it can actually change the allocation. So we've got a different allocation now for those effects. Okay, that's all you can change on that page. You can't actually go down and change your prog effects or your auxiliaries or anything like that. So you've got these other pages here. You've got auxiliary effects, and what you can do here, this is where I was talking about overriding the program effects. You can override them. So you can say turn override to yes, and what you can do is you can put a different chain on auxiliary 1, and that's done. I'll just put classic plate on. Now that is global to all programs, all setups, all songs, everything. So that classic plate now applies wherever I've got auxiliary send 1 enabled and where there's a signal coming out. Right, the other things that you can change here, you can change your output. So you can do it here if you go auto. Okay, that is whatever's naturally assigned in that program or whatever. Okay, or you can set it to primary or secondary. So you can actually assign these if you want to take that effects bus out and send it separately through the alternative outputs to say a mixer channel. You've got mod override. This you can override the mod source that's there. You can leave it what it was, or you can put your own modulation as a global thing. So what you might do is all the programs might have different mod sources programmed, and you might want to just make it global and do it. So what you can do is you can just override the mod and say, right, we're using mod wheel everywhere. Okay, so you've got that option there as well. Very useful. And now if we go down, what you've now got is that you've got these two signals here. So the bottom one that's where you can set whether it's post or pre, or P is whatever's assigned in that program or for that zone or layer. So P is as per the program, that's what P stands for, and then PST is post, PRE is pre. The one above it is the send amount. So again, P is whatever's in the program, and then you can dial it up, and you can do that for every channel. You can use this as an overall effects bus mixer, and you can tweak things from here. So if you've got all your channels sounding right, you've got everything happening, but you just want to tweak the effects, or just put a little bit more reverb on something, or take a bit of reverb off a particular channel, this is a good place that you can do it, because you can basically use this as a little effects mixer. Okay, auxiliary effects 2 is identical. There is no difference there whatsoever, except that it applies to auxiliary effects bus 2. Auxiliary effects bus 2 is the same as auxiliary effects bus 1 in every respect. Okay, and finally we've got the master effects. Now this is where you set it globally for the PC3. So you can, If you set master, what you can do is you can set compressor, EQ, you can set your order, you can set whether or not the master effects are enabled. So they're enabled there, and they're bypassed. So you can see that they're not really doing very much to the sound here. We're not pushing into that compressor, and the EQ is flat. that's how they're set by default. So, or you can set it to setup, and that's whatever's in the current setup. Okay, but again, we'll go into setup mode and we'll have a bit more of a look at that. Just while we're here, if you want to edit an effect, and you can see the bus there, you just select it, press edit, and you can get in and you can select it. And that's as easy as that. So that's how you get on. There's your 3 bands of compression there that you want to use. So that's as easy as that. You go and you select them, and then you get out, and it prompts you to save. Okay, so that's the effects mode. Let's go into setup mode, and as you'll probably remember from what we were looking at before, on the effects page, this looks remarkably similar to the effects page that we were just on. What the difference is that these refer to the zones. So in this particular program, there are 9 zones. And that's what's illustrated here. That's what only goes up to 9. If we added a new zone, it would have number 10 up there as well. If we took zones away, it would get rid of them. Again, you can enable effects for particular zones, particular programs, and that's these Ys that you've got here. But in every other respect, this is identical to what you've got in the effects page. It does the same things. You can turn effects on, you can turn effects off for particular zones. So when you're programming your setups, if you really need particular zones enabled, you can actually tweak them here and turn them on and off as you want. I guess one thing in terms of programming zones is, or how effects are allocated, is that they're allocated from the lowest zone or lowest MIDI channel up to the highest. So whatever is assigned to channel 1 is pretty much guaranteed of getting effects, and then as you go up, they've got less and less likelihood. So what you want to do is you want to put the things that from a programming perspective, if you get the opportunity, you want to put the things that you probably don't need effects on in the high channels, and leave the lower channels for the ones that where effects are really, really important. Because that it's just as a default behavior. So when you're going into program mode or into setup mode or whatever, it's going to make sure that those get allocated naturally without you having to go in and tweak these every time or whenever you make changes. Okay, so auxiliary effects 1 is exactly the same, except that you were just limited to the number of channels that you've got. Again, there's an override on this setup, so this is the setup now has control of those auxiliary effects bus. So if we change this, let's just find something a little bit different. It's not a reverb. Leslie, something that's come on. Look at all these reverbs. Oh, I saw. All right, there's a delay. Okay. So what's happening now is that I've just overridden those effects. I put a delay on instead of a reverb, and that's what it's done. But it does it because we're on the auxiliary effects. This is global. Again, so everything that gets sent to the auxiliary is now going through a delay rather than the reverb. So this is where you can program that. Again, mod override exactly the same as what you saw in the effects. You've got your output. You can reassign the outputs directly from within your setup mode. And one of the advantages of doing this is that this reinforces the aspect that setups are the highest level of object within the PC3. You're always existing within a setup. And this sort of shows the power of the setup. So you've got complete control over all the global effects, the master effects. So if we go to master effects, you can see we can go to setup, and we can set these for this specific setup. We can say, right, we've got a setup. It's really loud. We need to control the dynamics a bit, so let's crank the compressor up a little bit and start stripping away some of those really loud sounds and bring it back under control. Or it might be very bass heavy, and you might want to trim a bit of bass off. You can program that EQ for that particular setup. So that's the power of the setups, is that you have control over these global parameters. Auxiliary 1 and 2, as I said, they're identical to what you've got in effects mode, except that you're limited to the channels that are actually engaged at the moment within this setup. Okay, so let's move on to song mode. Song mode is the other place that you can set effects. You're going to be really surprised about this, but it looks remarkably similar to what you had in setup and on the effects page. And there's a good reason for that. It's because it does the same thing. Okay, so again, I won't go through this in detail again. You've got the same thing where you can turn effects on and off, and that's all the power you've got on this effects page. You can turn them on and off on a per channel basis. You can set the auxiliary effects, and you can set the master effects from within song mode. So again, the song mode can become your global controller of effects if that's what you want to do. Okay, so I think we've covered fairly well, I think, the effects architecture. I don't know if there's any questions there. There's a few of you online, but no one's posting any questions. So let's. I don't think there's really much more to say about the PC3 effects architecture. I hope I've made this a little bit clearer for you, and you can perhaps understand a little bit better how signals flow through the PC3. If you have any questions, hit me up on the forums at Kunker. There's obviously no questions. I must have done a pretty good job, so I'm happy about that. So I'll just summarise again what we've gone over. We've talked about the layer effects. Let me bring up the full screen so that you can see it. Okay, let's just scroll out so you can have a look at the whole thing. So what we've done is we've explained the layer outputs get directed by default into the prog effects. You have the option of turning off a prog effects for a particular layer and putting it instead through a layer effects. You also have the option of borrowing another layer's effects if you wanted to. So you can route the layer and send it to another layer effects. Just one thing, you can enable layer effects on channel 1 if you want. So you can actually have this as a layer effects controller rather than the prog effects. If you wanted to do that, it's up to you. There's not really much advantage in doing that, but it can be done. We explained the pre and post operation here. We explained that each of these is essentially an effects bus, and you're limited to 16 effects buses within the PC3. And we explained that the tap comes out immediately before it enters into this effects bus. So after all the layers have been mixed, the pre-tap comes out, and you can then use that to send to your auxiliary effects. So if you want to set them, if you want the signals to be done in parallel, use pre. If you want them done in series, use post. So simple as that. Auxiliary effects 1 and 2 you can't send to each other, so they can't be serial. These are always parallel to each other, but they can be serial to these. Okay, we explained that these are global to the entire PC3. So whether you're controlling this from within a program, within a setup, within a song, or within the effects page, these are global. So whatever they're set to at the current time is what all auxiliary sends get sent to. You can have, wherever we've got these effects blocks, I've got these 3 little things in it. That represents that you can put a chain in there. So you can put multiple effects inside these boxes. You can have 1 effect, you can have 10 effects. It depends on how much effects processing power you have available. We explained that the signals are mixed here before they're sent to the global the master effects, which is this EQ and multiband compressor, and then it goes to the outputs. So that's essentially the PC3 effects architecture. Right, we've got some time left, so what I want to do now is have a little bit of a talk about the K2600 and the KSP8. This is where KDFX got its roots, and it's certainly the scheme that I learnt KDFX on. It is a bit different to the PC3 FX architecture. With the PC3, what they've done is that they have made what they've done with the PC3 is that they've simplified this effects architecture. You have a number of objects, or you have 2 objects really within the PC3. There's actually 3, but there's only 2 that you can really see. one of them is an effect preset and the other one is an effect chain, and you program your chain sort of within it. So you build a chain which is, if we let's go and have a look at an effect. Alright, let's just bring up the screen so you can see what we're doing. Okay, so we're in one here, and you've got these boxes here, they're called, and they've called an effect here. But if you go in and have a look at this, this is actually the invisible algorithm that you've got. And in the K2600, these algorithms were directly selectable. So you could actually select this top line and you could change which effect algorithm that preset was using. You can't do that on the PC3, but, and I think, for me, I think it was a bit of a mistake, because what you need to do is, if there's a particular effect you like to use, like if I want to use TQ Verb, which is my favourite reverb, what I need to do is I need to search out within the manual to find which effect actually uses that algorithm. So it's a little bit counterintuitive. It would be good if you could just come in and just scroll through these until you found the effect algorithm that you want. I understand why Kurzweil did it. They wanted to simplify the architecture, because I got a lot of criticism about the way the K2600 effects architecture was, but when they did it, we lost a little bit of flexibility. So this is, what you're seeing here is a chain, and these chains are available within the K2600 as well. There was also another unit which was called a preset, and what that was it was a single one of these blocks, and it was different to a chain. So you had, if you just had one effect, you could use a preset, or you could use a chain with one effect on it. And I think that was probably the mistake. If they got rid of that the preset idea and just used chains and algorithms, it would have made a lot more sense, it'd been a lot easier. And I think that's, for me, it's a much more intuitive way to go. But the PC3 is what it is, and we cope with it. But what you do is you design effects in here. You can insert an effect, and you can add stuff. What I will say while I'm here, and I've got you can see how many units, effects units, each block uses by highlighting. You see at the top, the box 2 uses 1 unit out of 5. So the entire chain is using 5 units. That particular block's using 1. Okay, and that's that's really it. So you can program the effects, and this is what you're doing, is you're programming a chain. The K2600 looks the same when you're programming chains. It's the same sort of thing. Okay, let us have a look at the K2600 architecture and see how it differs from the PC3. So let's bring up. Okay, we're going to go into this view here, and we're going to have a look at it. Right, let's zoom in a little bit. Oops. My mouse has been a bit sensitive today. Okay, so what we're looking at here is the K2600. Now, the same as the PC3, what we've got is that we've got layers, and from your output page, you've got, so you come at the amp block, it goes to something called an output page. Now, on the output page, you can choose on the K2600 which one of the 4 effects buses you want to send to. Now, the reason there are 4 effects buses is this is carried over from the K2000 days and the K2500 days. With the K2000 rack, you had 4 sets of analog outputs on the back of the machine, and they were designated as bus A, B, C, and D. On the K2000, you had a little Digitech effects processor that sat across bus A, and that was the only internal effects that you could use on the K2000. The K2000 keyboard only had 2, they had A and B, didn't have the C and D. And when they went to the K2500, it was the same. You had A, B, C, and D. They were your outputs. And that was set on the output page. So when they implemented KDFX, they didn't want to change too much about the programming. Well, I don't know if they didn't want to, but they didn't. For whatever reason, they didn't change the programming. So instead, what they did is that they inserted KDFX in between the vast output and the physical output, like the jack in the back of the unit. Okay, and this is where all of this stuff here comes in. So KDFX on the K series had 4 effects buses in it, but they are extremely flexible, and it's more akin to a mixer than than an effects unit, and I'm going to show you another view of it which looks like a mixer in a second, and it's I find it a little bit more intuitive, and guys that have spent a lot of time on mixers probably find it a bit more intuitive as well. So hang on, I'm just going to check the audio. Yeah, it sounds alright. That's good. I don't want to do the same stuff up I did last night and do this for a third time. So what you had on the K2600, and that's one I'll use as an example, is that KDFX had these free EQs, and these are available on each of the 4 buses. Now these EQs could be filters, or they could be a parametric band, it could be a low band or a low shelf or a high shelf. So these are selectable, and they've got a full range of parameters in them. You've got your frequency, your Q, you've got your boost and cut, you've got, or if you filter, you've got a resonance factor there. They're pretty nice filters actually within here. But so you've got these are free. You've got these on every bus. So you've got you've got 2 EQ blocks here. And what happens when you come out of EQ blocks, you've then got 2 sends. You can send to 2 buses. You can send to, by default you send to 1 bus. So effects bus, well, how do I say this? KDFX bus, which is what these things here refer to, could then send to an effects bus, and these effects buses are called 1, 2, 3 and 4. I think they might have been A, B, C and D, but anyway, you've got 4 of those, and each of these from the EQ you've got a choice of sending to 2 of these, and they can be any 2 you want, but they can't be the same. So you can send, all of them can send to number 1 if you want, or all of them can send to number 2, or you could have them going to 1 on each, or you can blend them however you want. A lot of power there. And you have 4 of these effects buses, and again within these you had chains. Now one of the limitations with the K2600 is that you only had 8 total PAUs. So if you think about that, the PC3 has got 32. It's got 4 times the effects power of a K2600. So what you essentially had is you had 1 PAU, which was taking care of mixing and doing these EQs, and then you had 4 total that could be assigned across these 4 effects buses. So you could have 1 PAU on each bus, or you could, more normally what would happen is that you'd have probably 3 on one and 1 on another, or 2 and 2, or 2 and 1 and 1. It's very rare that you actually had enough effects to stretch across the 4 buses. Bus 4 in most of the preset programs on the K2600 is actually a dry bus, and they use that to do the wet dry mixing, which is a bit of a strange way to do it, but I guess it's certainly valid, but it can be a little bit confusing if you go into re-effect them. So what you have is you've got these effects buses. Now each of so these are mixed. You can have inputs from any of the 4 buses coming into a particular effects bus, and out of that effects bus you've then got a lot of routing options. You've got an auxiliary bus. This has got a total of 3 PAUs, and the trick that you needed to do on the K2600 if you wanted to get these big mammoth effects is that you needed to send through an effects bus, and then you had to redirect all of that into the auxiliary bus without sending anything to the mixed bus, and that's how you got use of all 7 PAUs to make one huge monster effect. The auxiliary bus is actually designed for reverb, so what you do is you put a reverb on here and then you use these for modulation effects or delay effects or choruses or whatever. So that was, I think, the thinking behind it, but it doesn't mean that you had to use it that way. But the way, because there's so much flexibility, you can actually almost use this as an additional bus. So if you've run out of PAUs, what you can do is you can use effects bus 4 with nothing in it and then send it to the auxiliary bus to get your fourth effects bus. What tended to happen on the K2600, and probably the reason I fell in love with the TQ verb so much, is that you had 3 effect slots here, regardless of whether you used them or not, so you may as well put the biggest, juiciest reverb you could find on it, and TQ verb was one of the ones that used up all 3 of those effect slots quite nicely. So that's the architecture. So each of these buses can send, all of these are sends, and you've got adjustable amounts here on. You can send to the mixed bus and or the auxiliary bus from all 4 of these buses at the same time. And then what you can do for an auxiliary bus, it's actually got to send back to the mixed bus, and the way that it's designed is this mixed bus then gets sent to a physical output. And so this is where you can do essentially mixing. It's an option. You don't have to do it that way. What you can do instead is that these outputs you can select to tap a signal from anywhere. So you can tap it from pre-effects, post-EQ, or you can tap it from post-effects, or you can tap it from the mix bus or the auxiliary bus. So you've got a wide range of things. And then what you've got is the volume slider on the K2600 is actually a hardwired mix of the physical outputs, and that goes to the mix out. So you had to be a bit careful. If you're using this mix bus, you wanted to make sure that you plugged your cables into the physical or the individual outs rather than the mix out, because you can start stacking up the signal and get extremely loud very quickly and start overloading this bus. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to have a look at an alternative view of the K2600, and that is as a mixer. This is a little sheet I did a while back to help people out in terms of a different way to visualize KDFX on the K2600 to hopefully make it a little bit clearer and a little bit better. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at the up here. So what you've got is you've got the outputs here on the 4 vast buses. These are the 4 vast outputs, and this is the gain on the vast output page. Okay, so that comes into the bus essentially, and you can have any number of layers or programs sending to these output pages, and the way that you do the mixing is you actually do it within either your output page or your amp page on the layer or within the program. Okay, but you select on the output page on the K2600, you can choose which one of these outputs you go to, and what it is, it's not actually an output, it is actually selecting which of the KDFX buses you're choosing. Okay, so what you've got is for each of these buses, you've then got, these are the 2 EQs that we saw. So again, these are, you can pick whichever one you want, but you've got 2 of these for each of those 4 effects buses. And then once through that, you've then got the choice of, these are auxiliary controls, so you can or auxiliary sends, so you can pick which one of these you want. And on this diagram, they're color coded. So that number 1, actually, there's a thing up there with a bright yellow, which is actually the effects input, and I'll show you that in a second. For each channel, the effects send 1 and effects send 2 have to be different. You don't have to select them, like you don't have to select anything at all for either of these, but you can't select 1 here and 1 here, but you can select any other combination. So you can select 1 and 2, or 2 and 1, or 2 and 3, but you can't select 2 and 2 or 1 and 1. But you can go across here, so all of these 4 could send to effects bus 1 if you wanted to, or 2 or 3 or 4, whichever you want. So these are completely flexible, and you've got an amount for both of these 2 sends. Okay, we go down. These faders don't actually do anything. I just put them there diagrammatically. There's not actually any provision for faders. But what happens is that yellow that you saw down there is effects bus 1. So that actually gets sent from that send, the auxiliary send, up to these effects buses. So whatever's sent to there gets mixed, and then it gets sent through an effects chain, which is what you've got here. So you've got 4 independent buses here, and they come out of these effects returns. Again, these are color coded, and we'll see why in a second. Now, when you come out of the effects chain, you've then got some choices you can make. You can send to the auxiliary bus, or you can send to the mix bus, or you can send nowhere at all. You can make it silent if you wanted to. That's up to you. You don't have to send these, but you can. You can send. You've got 2 sends: auxiliary bus and mix bus. If you send to the auxiliary bus, it goes down to this KDFX auxiliary bus here, and it goes through another effects chain here, and then it goes to the auxiliary return. Now, the auxiliary return has also got a send to the mix bus, which is the same as these ones here. They get sent to the mix bus. So what you've got is, from these outputs, if we go up to the top here, this is the output of KDFX output. Now, these are actually physical outputs. So these are the physical outs. Now, for each of these physical outs, you can pick any one of these outputs, and you can see they're all color coded. So I can select pre-effects 1, which is that bright yellow we were talking about. I can select post-effects 1, or I can select these bus outputs. So I can select auxiliary bus output or mixed bus output. Okay, and if you wanted a mix, if you wanted the mix, so what about auxiliary bus input what you can do is that if you set, the way that you get around that is you set auxiliary bus to have no effects on it and just let it act as a mixer, or you can just use it as a mix bus. You can use these as two separate buses if you like, or you can have the auxiliary bus end getting sent to the mix bus. So you've got an extraordinary amount of flexibility. Right then, so once you've selected these, that's what comes out of these 4 physical outputs that are on the back of the K2600. Now internally, these are hardwired, and the volume slider affects only the physical mix out. This actually doesn't send any MIDI signals or anything like that. It goes to this physical mix out. So if you want to use this as a true mix out, what you've got to do is that you need to set something that's not the mix bus, or you need to be very careful about what you've assigned to go to this mix bus and auxiliary bus on these particular physical outs. You can just have one of them and let the mix bus do all the mixing, or you can have, say, post effects 1, 2, 3 and 4, or say post effects 1, post effects 2, auxiliary bus, for example, is maybe how you've programmed them. But you just need to be careful about how you set it up so that you don't sort of get double signals. Maybe you want double signals, but you just needed to be very careful about how you program that. I think that's what caused a lot of the confusion within the K2600, and what a lot of the criticism was, is that there was so much extraordinary flexibility in terms of routing within the KDFX, is that it was easy to fall into traps where you had where you had the same signal getting sent to the same place, or you were duplicating signals, or it was actually very easy to route your signals to nowhere, so that you had no sound coming out of your K2600, which was very frustrating for some people. So that was inherent in the design of the KDFX. Once you understood it, and if you're one of those sort of 3 or 4 people that actually got your head around KDFX, it was an extraordinary system to operate with. It was a lot of fun. You had so much flexibility, and the quality of the effects that are within these are extraordinary. The reverbs are really, really good. I really like the reverbs. The compressors are very fast acting. They're very transparent. They don't colour your sound, so they're a little bit different to your analog compressors, for example, in that they don't tend to colour your sound, but they act as compressors in terms of clamping down your dynamics. They work extremely well doing that. The delays, there is a really good range of very, very powerful delays. You can do all sorts of wonderful things with them. The choruses, the phases are all really fat and juicy within KDFX as it was programmed on the K2600. Some of the effects on the PC3 have lost a bit of that character. The phases are one that I've sort of banged on about a little bit. They aren't of the same calibre, in my opinion, as what the ones were on the K2600 and the KSP8. Something has changed in the programming of those effects algorithms, and I think that they've lost a lot of character. We've lost all the really, really good delays. That we don't have the Spectrum delays on the PC3, which is a crying shame, because they were so much fun. What the spectral delay is, for those of you that are not aware, they are a delay that has 6 taps, or has a number of taps on it, and each of those taps has actually got a picture block and a shaper on them, and they're a lot of fun. So what you can do is you can send delays, and you can actually pitch those delay steps, and you can assign MIDI controllers. You can actually play your delay steps if you want, and assign them to key tracking, and you can actually pitch your delay steps up and down. They're really, really good. I use them a lot, and they're very high fidelity, so you can, if you've got very delicate highs in the sounds that you're programming, they can get preserved through the programming of those effects. Actually, while we're just talking back on the PC3, there's a couple of little bugs I should point out to you guys, or one of them in particular. That is, if you're using a pre-effects, a auxiliary send in pre-mode, so that bypasses the post effects, and if you're using the panner block to send to that, if you pan all the way across to the right, that right hand effects bus will become dry at the extreme right. The way to get around it is to put it into post, and it doesn't happen. Kurzweil are aware of the bug, but I don't know if it's going to be fixed. There's also another bug where, in certain circumstances, if you play with the programming and the sends, you can actually silence your effects channels. So if that happens, and you unexpectedly everything becomes silent, it's probably because you've come across this little bug. Again, I'm not sure if that one is scheduled to be fixed or if it can be fixed, but it is. Just be aware that PC3 isn't a perfect system, perfect operating system. There are still bugs in the system, so sometimes you come across some of these quirky behaviours. It's not by design; it's because there's something not quite right. Now, if you've got some questions about that, or you notice something that doesn't act like you think it does, feel free to drop a note on the Kanka forums, and we'll have a look and have a look at those and see if it is a bug or have a look at it. Okay, before we go, let's have a quick chat about the KSP8. And I explained before this. Well, actually, before we move on to that, let's finish off the K2600. What I want to talk about is the structure of the K2600 effects. Now, you've got 4 objects that are available. You've got an algorithm, you've got a preset, a chain, and a studio. Now, on the K2600, the studio is global. You can have one studio active at any one time, and that controls all the routing, all of the effects that are loaded within it. It's like a global thing, and you can set that in the effects mode, or you can set it in setup mode, or song mode, or program mode as well, if you wanted to. But it is global for the entire K2600. And one of the things that made it difficult to program, particularly setups, is that unlike the PC3 where you've got these insert effects that are sitting on the layers, that was actually pulled out and stuck on the outputs after the VAST program. So the effects did not carry across with the program when you put them into a setup. And that was very frustrating, because when you program a setup, you had to go away, you had to plan how your effects architecture was going to look before you actually ended up building your setup. So you needed to decide which reverb you were going to use. You needed to decide which, if you had delays, different types of delays, you had to work out which one you're going to do and what bus it was going to go on, and then you had to go into the setup and make sure that the relevant outputs for those programs were going to the right effects buses. And if you had different layers going to different effects buses or different outputs, you had to then go in and reprogram your program to make sure that everything mapped to where it was. So building setups in the K2600 was quite time consuming when you started getting into the KDFX programming and structuring it. So you had the studio, which is top level. You had the chains, which is basically the same as what you see when you hit edit on an effect within the PC3. That's where you've got a number of different blocks together. You've got the preset, which I talked about before, which is a single effect algorithm. So what you could do within those effects blocks, you could either choose a preset or a chain. Now, I think the reason that came about was because when KDFX was first built for the K2500, you only could put a preset onto the effects bus. The chains were something that came with an operating system update, so they weren't originally available. You only had presets, and I think that's the legacy of it and where that all came about, and sort of helped build a little bit of confusion. And at the bottom layer, you've got algorithms, which are actually the effects DSP itself. So that might be a particular reverb type, or a particular delay type, or a particular chorus model. So that's where it came about. Right, that's probably a good way to move across to the KSP8, because on the KSP8 you've got the same 4 levels. You've got a studio, you've got a chain, you've got a preset, and you have an algorithm. You have more algorithms on the KSP8 than you do on the K2600. It is capable of doing lots of cool surround sound stuff. It has a very nice surround sound compressor, for example, which can be repurposed into a dual stereo gate with independent sidechains. Or you can... It's also got a beautiful surround reverb, and the way it works is that you can, if you've got the handy dandy controller, which I've got one sitting around somewhere, I can't see it at the moment, but if you've got the handy dandy controller, it's actually got a joystick on it, and you can map that joystick to where the source of your signal is in, I guess, 2-dimensional space, and you can actually move it around the sound field. And the way that the algorithm is done, it calculates all the reflections and the reverberation from that sound source that is moving around in space. It sounds really, really good in surround sound. It has also got a lot of other effects in there that the K2600 doesn't have. Also, for the EQs, you can pick oscillators instead of filters, which is really cool. So you can actually turn your KSP8 into a synth. Quite well. It's not easy, but you can certainly do it, and it sounds really, really good. So the KSP8 has got twice as many PAUs as, and PAU stands for Processor Allocation Unit, if you were wondering what that acronym was. It's got twice as many as the K2600 and half as many as the PC3. So when you think about that, the KSP8 was quite an expensive bit of kit, and you're getting two of those sitting inside your PC3 with a little bit of limitation. You don't have all the algorithms, but otherwise you've got the power of two KSP8 sitting inside your PC3, so you're very, very lucky people. What else can I say about the KSP8? It had... what else? It's not that dissimilar to the K2600 KDFX section. It's got more effects. You've got 8 buses. The buses can be configured as 8 mono buses if you want, or 4 stereo buses, or you can set them as a range of surround buses. So the surround buses generally used up 6 of your available inputs. You also had on the inputs to the... it has another section in it. So what you've got is you've got an input section where you can select the inputs. Then you've got the EQ and send page, which is similar to what you've got on the... which is where KDFX on the K2600 starts. It starts at essentially the EQ send page that is the second stage of the KSP8. So before that, you've actually got an input selector. So you've got a option card that you can put in the back, so you can mix and match signals from anywhere. You can pull a couple of ADAT inputs into one. You can pull analog inputs into another one. You can... so you've got a range of selections there of what you want to process with the KSP8. I don't think there's really much more to say about that. The structure's fairly well the same as the K2600. The reason I actually bought my KSP8 was to stick on the additional buses on the K2600. So I had essentially 3 KDFX buses, because I found that I very quickly ran out of effects on the K2600. So the KSP8 let me expand that quite nicely. And then I realised that it was actually a hell of a lot of fun, so I actually stuck that onto mixer buses, and then I was putting everything through it rather than just the K2600, and that was a much more fun way to do it. And then I got an option card and just went all digital with it, which is a good way to be. I still use it to this day. It gets done for the majority of our mastering work. We do our multiband compressing in there. We use the EQs within the KSP8. We use the reverbs within the KSP8 if we need that. I have programmed a few custom effects that do things like simulate a stereo widening effect from the SPL Mark II-T. So I programmed that in there, and we use that for that purpose. I've also programmed in an Edison emulator, which is a Behringer Edison, which is a very useful little effect. What it does is that you can, the way it's designed is that you make your bass more mono, and you make your highs, you widen the stereo field on that. But the other really cool thing about it is if you ever find it playing on a mono PA, you can then just bring all the stereo field down to a mono compatible field, and the same will go out to both speakers, so you don't have to pick a left or right. You can mix them within that to make a mono signal, and it's really good if you've got, you don't lose all one side of your delay taps, for example, if you're going to play on a mono PA. Alright, let's have a look at timer. We've gone just over the hour, so I might take this opportunity to say goodbye to you all. Thanks for tuning in. There's no questions up on the chat, but look, please tune in and start getting some questions happening there. I want these to be interactive sessions. I want to run through a few things, and as we get into a bit more of the editing, and we're going to have a look more at editing and how we build programs and how we make choices about things. I want to try and do that in some of these future episodes. It's going to be really good to get your feedback and to look at the direction where you want to take things, and to get questions from you guys about why I'm doing particular items. I realise at times a little bit inconvenient for some. I am broadcasting from Perth in Western Australia, and it is a bit of an odd time. I think it's pretty good for the European guys that aren't, but I think it comes through your lunch break. I think one of the guys from Portugal said that this broadcast time is right in the middle of his lunch break, so it's probably not the best time for him to be tuning in live. But if you've got a suggestion of if pushing it out an hour or two is going to make it easier for you guys, let me know on the stream and I can see what I can do about adjusting that. Let me know on the Kunka forums. Excuse me, just going to have a drink of water. That's better. If you've got any other suggestions about the stream or about the quality or anything like that, let me know. I'm looking at trying to improve the audio and video quality. If these things take off and you guys are enjoying them and I get into them, do a few more, I'll spring a couple $100 and get a better option of the software, which will reduce the lag that you see when I'm talking and hopefully improve the overall quality of the stream. It means that I'll be able to use a better microphone and be able to input a mixer rather than having to rely on the video camera's ambient microphones. What else? I'll just go on. If you guys have managed to track down these live tutorials and you aren't Mahogany Room members, I've only been putting these in the Mahogany Room, but of course you might be able to find this on Ustream or somewhere else. If you're not signed up to Mahogany Room, please get over there and help support the Kunka forums. Any money that goes into there keeps the forums online, helps Brian afford to be able to do upgrades and to be able to add extra features to you. It gives him a bit more incentive to provide content for Mahogany Room members, and I'm sure you'll all agree it is extraordinary content. There's some wonderful things that are coming out of his efforts. The manuals and the programming that he's done have certainly been an aid to me. My website is godlike.com.au, and on there you can find a whole bunch of music that I do with my mate Jamie, and there's some Kurzweil stuff on there, there's some Yamaha stuff on there for MLAN support and studio connections and stuff like that. All sorts of weird stuff. A lot of the artists and that we're sort of supporting here in Perth and trying to get a bit of exposure to. So look, all the music's free there, so get on over there and download some stuff and consume and enjoy. If you like what you see there, please spread the website address around. Let your mates know they can come through and download it. That's all good. Just one more thing in terms of these videos. What I want to do is I will release these to YouTube probably towards the end of the year when the Mahogany Room membership is up. You've probably got another day or so, or maybe it's expired now in terms of getting onto the Mahogany Room, because Brian I think he has closed it off, or he's planning on closing off membership to the Mahogany Room shortly. There's still going to be some content coming for members that have already signed up in there. One of which I want to be some of these tutorials that I'm doing. So give you guys a little bit extra, a little bit of incentive to hang around and to try and get a bit of value for money for the money that you've put into helping the forums. So on that note, look, I'd like to thank Brian for the Kunka forums and for helping set everything up and the support it's given me. I'd like to thank you guys that have tuned in and watching and that are watching this tutorial at a later date. I like to hear back from you guys, so please hit me up, give me comments in the forum, let me know what you want. As I mentioned, all of the graphics that I've used within these tutorials are within the Mahogany Room. You can download them, consume them, print them out, scribble on them, stick them up in your studio wall, whatever. They're yours to use and to help you find your way around cursable instruments. So on that, from Perth, I'm saying goodbye to you all. Oh wow, look at that lag. See you later, guys. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I shall see you again shortly. See you later.